Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals.
It's episode 13 of season 6. Sam and I had a recent discussion around Microsoft's Security Copilot, Microsoft's generative AI security solution to support security operations respond quicker to incidents. Here are a few things we covered. What is generative AI? What is Security Copilot? What are agents? And how much does it cost?
We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show.
It's a really great episode, so let's dive in.
Hey Alan, how are you doing this week?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, doing really well, thank you. Doing really well. What's new in Alan's world?
Had a broken car. Still got a broken car, I suppose. It's not really IT related. It's technology related, probably. But yeah, it's getting there. I'll be back soon. But yeah, that's probably it from that side. We're getting a little bit more intel, I think, around some of the attacks from M&S and Co-op and stuff.
Oh my! I was going to talk about this because have you been into a co-op recently?
It's pretty empty in some ways, and I don't know. I think it's an issue with well, maybe it's not, but an issue with our local one, the one down the road. But their internet keeps going, and they can't use any of their system. They got basically do offline transactions. So I didn't know if this was related to the cyber thing or this is just because they've had it before where the internet's been down.
Yeah.
But you can't use like Apple Pay or Google Pay or anything like that. And there's so many people that are like, well, I haven't got my card with me.
Yeah.
And you can't even use contactless. You've got to put the card in and put your PIN in.
Wow,
so it's like
okay.
to do the almost the offline transaction.
Yeah, offline.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, card holder present offline. Yeah, PIN.
Yeah. So there's so many people that are like, well,
because near my house, there's like about 1,000 co-ops, but our closest co-op is quite big. Like as in, it's probably the biggest co-op I've probably ever seen. It's more like a little mini supermarket than it is like a corner shop sort of co-op. And I hadn't been in there for ages. And it was funny because but maybe about a week ago, my wife said it was really weird. I went into co-op today and they had like nothing in there, and it didn't really like twig in my head. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I obviously knew what was going on, but I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. Maybe they just missed a delivery or something like that. She's like, no, it was really bare. It was like, and I was like, okay, well, whatever. And I went in there today, and it's like so much of it is bare, but they've got loads of just random things.
yeah,
Right. So like, if you want like, what was it? On the end of like a chiller cabinet, there were loads of like pre-packaged like quotes fresh chips, right? So like non-frozen like chips.
yeah.
There was about, I don't know, 25 packets of chips, but there was nothing else in the end freezers. It was like empty. And then you like walk down and there would be like, I don't know, 1,000 chocolate mousses, but there would be no ham. Like it's just it's kind of like it felt to me like they had missed some deliveries and their just-in-time system had stocked certain things but not others. Does that make sense? Like that's what it felt like to me, because some random stuff was there was loads of it and other stuff there wasn't. So it's just really strange.
So I read, I think it was a BBC article around it, and they reckon, because apparently the hacking group had contacted the BBC, and they were basically moaning about Co-op because they said that they were moments away from taking them over. And in effect, the Co-op made the decision to basically take down their systems themselves, rather than be, held to ransom and data loss and things like that. They basically almost like imploded themselves.
Cut the hard line. Cut the hard line.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. They just shut everything down for, whatever, to basically stop being attacked. And they reckon, or the attackers, supposedly suggested that it would have been bigger than the M&S one.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, M&S probably, in my circle of like my little universe of people, M&S biggest cyber incident probably ever. to be totally honest with you. I've had I've had members of family. What's going on with M&S, Sam? What's going on with M&S? Right? Why can't I order online? Loads of people just messaging me going, "Why's my data been stolen?" And I've never been I've never been messaged like that from I call it like normal people, like non-security and techie people, right? So I'm like, this is it's very impactful, because M&S is it's kind of like a, I don't know, what is it, Ellen? It's like a staple of like British society, isn't it? Marks and Spencers, right? Like
Yeah,
it's I think there's just a universal love for Marks and Spencers, isn't there, in some respects, right? So, yeah, very impactful, I would say. Um,
and
you
and
know,
they're quite diverse in what they cover, don't they? Because they're
yeah,
obviously like clothing, but they're also food places and food outlets and things like that now
yeah,
as well, aren't they?
food,
So
furniture. They've
mm,
got every like type of clothing, homeware, travel. They do money. Like there's loads of, they do banking. Like I know it's probably not the same thing, but they're sort of in everything basically. Um, yeah. So, well, fingers crossed that um, yeah, those teams have probably been pretty busy. So yeah, we extend a hug out to those people because it
yes,
must be pretty stressful having to deal with that.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those incidents, especially in the UK at least, because obviously it's been local to us. I think a lot of other organisations are now thinking, "Oh, we need to sort this out."
Yeah,
Our
yeah,
issue, the issues, all the things we maybe wanted to do or we're not so good at, or
yeah,
have we got a thing in place, kind of thing.
yeah. Because I think a lot of industries, they are very sort of insular, aren't they? Right? They maybe don't pick up on larger news events from like maybe other countries and other industries, right? So when multiple organizations in the retail sector get hit, it does send a sort of a shockwave and a signal through those groups, right? We hear about all these different types of incidents, attacks, threat actor profile, all the time, don't we, because of what we do. um but I don't think it's forefront for at the scale. I'm not saying that they don't
Yeah,
have security teams and IT teams that are are thinking about this constantly. But it does send a ripple through those industries, doesn't it?
but yeah, and I think as well, it's not that M&S were, I think, relaxed on anything. It wasn't like there was gaping holes. I don't think. I think it was just that this was such a targeted attack because I'm sure I read some, or whether again the attack, the attacking group had sort of said how they did it was, I think they did, they were doing SMS swap, SIM swapping, SIM cloning. I heard, taking over people's phones to do the MFA. I'm
Well, no
sure I
phishing resistant MFA, Alan.
well,
SMS MFA. What is this?
yeah,
1995.
yeah, but yeah,
I'm only messing.
okay,
I'm only messing. I'm only messing.
but it's not like your average thing,
No. Yeah, it's pretty.
It's
Yeah, sophisticated, right? And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
targeted, highly
exactly. It was a
targeted. Yeah.
yeah, so
This isn't like some random drive-by type attack, is it?
no,
This is pre-planned. Yeah, 100%.
yeah,
Um,
especially if they were hitting hard with the other two as well. You were co-op in that. That was hit
yeah,
one, then next day grab the others before
yeah,
they.
can respond. Well,
Mm,
you know, it's probably a good segue, isn't it? Because there's is a potentially a tool that can help you with your cyber instance, isn't there, Alan?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, they can yeah, assist. Yes.
I like it. I like it. Right. So what are we talking about this week, Alan?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about. We haven't done it yet because I don't know why we haven't done it. Actually, probably just waiting for us to have more exposure to it and things like that. But we're going to talk about Security Copilot from Microsoft. So I think we've done episodes on 365 Copilot stuff, and that. So yeah, it's to start looking at the security side of it and talk
Yeah.
about all the fun bits around that.
Yeah, because how long has Security Copilot been like even GA for? It's been, is it a
A
year?
year,
Just over a year, isn't it?
yeah, just over a year. It got announced in the first Microsoft Secure, which was 2 years ago, but it was never exposed to the public. It was more of a this is what's coming kind of thing, and this was obviously, well, not obviously, but as Chat GPT and stuff had sort of been out for 6 months, or and things like that. And I think Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot, had been announced, kind of thing. And then it's probably a year until partners got early access, things like that. And then public preview / GA around April May time last year. So and this Microsoft Secure, they added some new updates to it. So it's kind of, we're almost like on the version 1.5 / version 2 of it, I guess, from that side. So
Okay, should we sort of, try and unpick it because it is quite, quite a big sort of topic to cover. Should we start with the sort of basics? It is a co-pilot, which that leads me to sort of believe that it's under the hood is generative AI, if that's the correct thing to say. If so, could you just give us a primer on like the underlying sort of AI technology that's being used?
yep. So as you said, it is a generative AI. And that, if no one's not heard the definition of it in the last 12, 18, 24 months, is in effect, an AI using large, language models to be able to generate content based on, data it's been grounded on. When we say grounding, we mean, a sort, things like a version of the internet, a timestamp, isn't it, Sam? Kind of thing. A moment in time. It's the internet's being scanned by it and put into the large language model, or grounded to data that you own, kind of thing, or you've generated, for it to basically create content based upon it. And that's what we see day to day with like you said, Sam, Microsoft Copilot, Chat GPT, Grok. DeepSeek, I suppose you could put in there as one that's probably everyone might know. Maybe not in the positive light, but it is still a Gen AI. So yeah, and really the Microsoft Security Copilot in effect sits on OpenAI as its largest language model from that side of things, with some enhancements in between, which I'll go through later. Is there anything else, Sam, around Gen AI? I think everyone's probably heard a lot about it, kind of thing. But
Yeah, I think the only thing I probably wanted to add is sort of the difference between I'll call it like, it's a disservice to call them sort of generic generative AI models, like um your Chat GPTs and your Groks, right, and your Geminis that are trained on web data, right? So you
mhm.
ask it a question and it generates the text using its large language model that, like as you said, Alan, has been grounded in the knowledge that it's been trained on. Okay, and that might be a scrape of the internet from a specific point in time. But what we saw with 365 Copilot is we started to see sort of the, I'll call it real time or near real time, grounding of these models in your own data. Okay, and specialist models for specific types of data. So you could train a generative AI model on. I could pick a random thing because you talked about your car maintenance manuals, right? So you could train a large language model on all of the Haynes manuals that have ever been. If you are from the UK, I don't know. Haynes manuals must be worldwide. Anyway, like let's say you've got manuals on how to fix cars. Um, you know, um, you may build a generative AI model that is based on the training of that data, because it might not be appropriate to search the internet on um, how to fix an alternator on a car. You might have specific data that you want your large language model to be trained on, from your own data sources. So that's essentially what 365 Copilot is doing. It's training, well, it's tokenizing and training um, on your actual data essentially. So you can search from the web, but also you can pull from your own type of data set, and that is also what we're going to see with Security Copilot. So that's why I think it's important to really reinforce that, is because even though you do have these more generalist, like, big models that can sometimes be less accurate because of the wide ranging data they're trained on, you can train really specific and sort of quotes knowledgeable models on specific data that you want to.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of ties then into how, you know, well, probably need to talk about what Security Copilot is, but in general, but kind of how Security Copilot actually works in under the hood kind of thing. So similar to what you said, sort of Sam, on sort of the near real time of getting context, grounding in sort of near real time kind of thing as you ask a query to it. It in effect has plugins, I'm going to kind of say data plugins really, where you can hook it up to the Microsoft technology. So, Defender XDR, Intune, Sentinel, Microsoft Defender Threat Intelligence, and then some other third-party ones. So maybe like I can't Virus Total, things like that. Somewhere where you can query something. But as part of that process of Security Copilot, it goes and your prompt. Well, when you ask it a question, it chooses a connector unless you specify a connector in your prompt, and then goes and collects some data to add sort of local. Well, it's like pre-processing kind of the query to add more context, more grounding data, to then pass it to the open, the Azure Open AI that Microsoft manages, to then create the content, the response basically. So again, that the Open AI that Microsoft has doesn't ever get trained by your data; it all stays within your environment. It's just the basic stuff that gets added to the prompt basically.
Yeah, and that is fair to say, because I think the way I described it is, they were training data, but you're completely right. They're tokenizing data and injecting it, in the context ready for you to query. So that is a really fair point to call out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of how the basics of how Security Pilot works. But I guess really, let's talk about what Security Copilot is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Security Copilot is a natural language assistive an assistant basically to security operations analyst. As it sounds, it is your co-pilot to doing things. It's never at the moment envisioned of taking over doing certain things. The agents might be deemed as maybe doing a little bit more automation, but we'll talk about that later. But in effect, Security Pilot has access to be able to help with scenarios like incident response, threat hunting, intelligence gathering, posture management, as well as being able to let's think about this now, being able to compare different policies within your environment, maybe in Intune, things like that. And it's probably fair to say there was two scenarios of sort of how you could interact with Security Copilot, but there's probably now three with the new agents. So one being standalone, or what's been deemed as standalone, and that is in effect a prompt, similar to your chat GPTs, things like that. Basically a prompt screen where you can ask it anything about your environments or anything like that based on the connectors that you have, and then you'll get a response back from that. Or you've got the embedded experience, which is where Security Copilot is embedded into the port, the various portals. So the example is, Intune, Entra, Defender XDR, Purview. I think that's probably it. And within there, then there's predefined prompts or predefined actions that Security Copilot will be able to do. The example might be that in Intune, like I said, you can say, I've got two devices. Can you compare the policies? So it does that sort of comparison for you. It could be that when you're going through the settings, of within Intune, and you don't quite understand what one of the settings are, you can click the Copilot button. It will, in effect, generate you a response that maybe you can understand more than the description that Microsoft's put onto the page. So that's kind of Sec admin at that point, helping you with your day to day. With Security Copilot in the Defender XDR portal, that's when you click on an incident, it will summarize the incident. What happened, what took place, and maybe some recommendations or what next actions you should take with it. And again, within that, you've also got things like being able to analyze a script. So maybe you've seen a script in the timeline of a device, that's got Defender for Endpoint on it or Defender for servers. You can click on the script and say, tell me what is the script doing, kind of thing, and then it will, document or summarize, each step of that script is doing, based on what how it's been written, things like that. So it's very powerful to get some quick information or to be able to understand something without having to have the knowledge of PowerShell or anything like that from a script perspective, because that might take some time. There might be skills that you don't have yet. So it's enhancing the ability for, I suppose, maybe it's definitely a help for junior analysts, things like that, to get you kind of up to speed, but does help the veteran analysts, things like that, to do some of the mundane checks that maybe they do as well. And then finally, we've got this new way of interacting with it, and it's the Security Copilot agents. And again, we can probably dive into these a bit more. We talked about it was it last week? Week before? It's a Microsoft Secure one, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah.
But basically, there's some checks that can be, when they're enabled, they can do some checks for you all the time, basically against conditional access or triaging, reporting of phishing or phishing attacks, to make sure, to see if they're false positives or, exactly, those sort of things. So, kind of doing stuff for you without having you to interact with it, but maybe not taking action on stuff, as an example. So yeah, there's a lot that it does there. So
it sounds like to me, a large part of it is to help you become more streamlined in certain actions and activities. Is that fair to say? Oh, sorry. Do you want to?
Well, I was going to say, yeah, you're right. So there are things called prompt books. It kind of sounds exactly what they are. It's a group of prompts that maybe you go through. So maybe there's a process, your response or your investigation or triaging, tasks that you do every time for a certain type of incident, kind of thing. You in effect can build those prompts to run one after the other, basically, to basically get you the data, all you need, all the summary at the end, as you need, from there, to maybe save you from having to query it all to go and do it yourself. And Microsoft provides some templates, predefined ones as well. And again, you can put variables in there. So, if you're going to say, can you go and find me the last 10 sign-ins for X user, and then tell me, go and find out the IPs and query if they're good or bad, kind of thing, or known to be malicious. You can put that into a prompt book, and that's 2 prompts sort of done for you to get the output, quicker and more efficient.
Okay, so you can sort of structure the way that you interact with, Security Copilot. So if I've got an analyst, and let's say, I don't know, part of your instant like management process is that they've got to uh, query various systems in sort of a logical way. You could chain those activities together to sort of standardize your process and your output, I suppose, that you're going to get out at the end of it.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, whilst you can do the interactions through the prompt books, the agents, the embedded, you can also build logic apps to interact with Security Copilot and provide it with the data as well. So you could, if you had, if there wasn't a connector, because again, you can build custom plugins as well to access various data. It might be your CRM system if you need to, or your ITSM, to be able to maybe query some data in there. When was the last incident or ticket for a password reset put in, and who was it by? Maybe that's some information that's valuable. But within the logic app, you can almost do all your API queries to get the data, put it into sort of one nice sort of piece of information, and then feed that into Security Copilot to do a summarization of it all, and then post that into the instance in Defender XDR.
Yeah.
So by the time an analyst, not by the time an analyst gets to it, but when the analyst gets to it, within sort of, well, depending on how much data, of course, but within 5 minutes, there's a summary of all the IPs, all the usernames, all the applications they're communicating with, and whether they're good or bad, kind of thing. So straight out the door, they're like, right, okay, I've got this information. I now know what my next ask of Security Copilot is, or my next investigation sort of stage is, without having to do those 20 checks for me, because a Logic app / prompt book has done that for me. So
And like 365 Copilot, does this have access to like data in 365? What about my like standard operating procedures and things like that? Can I if one of my analysts doesn't, let's say they get stuck, they forget what the next step is in my custom process. Can we feed that type of data into Security Copilot?
yeah, so 2 things, not necessarily related to that, but 2 things are that one is you can get it to in effect use web data, so you can ask it to use that as well to help with the its response. The second part is, I believe you can get it to access your 365 data that, as a user, you can see. But also, as part of the back end of Security Copilot, as an individual, you can upload your like operational guide, or your operational processes into it, and then it will use that as context to respond how you would respond to an incident. So if you said, or if you had an issue where there was a malicious IP address, it would use the context of that to say, we've got it, that your normal procedure is to then go and block that IP on a firewall, maybe, or whatever that might be. So yeah, it can add context in for you. One, to ask what you would, you could ask it what is the operational, what is the next step. But 2, its responses may take that into context, so it's not just not say generic or different every time. It's using that as a grounding for its response.
Okay, great. So yeah, if I've got my own custom, glossary of terms, taxonomies, standard operating procedures, we can if we want to keep it completely disconnected from like 365 and SharePoint, and just sort of inject our final versions of our documentation, should we want to.
Yeah, I mean, it is at the moment is on an individual basis. So there's not a, unfortunately at the moment, there's not a way to say, okay, this is, this is our, standard operational procedure. I'll put it in the Security Copilot as the, you know, for everyone kind of thing, if that makes sense. And then it can, everyone then gets it by default. And if there's an update, then, it's done essentially, and then everyone sort of gets updated. It is on a individual basis that you need to sort of update that
Okay.
that data. Same thing with the connectors. All the connector or access to data is based on your role or your access again. So, it's not like Copilot can go off and see everything, and you can ask it, which one's the worst machine, as a standard user, to work out which one you want to attack, from that kind of thing. You have to have, a security role anyway to be able to see the data, to be able to then query it. So you've still got that sort of RBAC model there.
Okay, so yeah, there's definitely multiple ways to interact with it. There are multiple use cases for what it can assist with, and I think your original point is that it's more aimed at an assistive technology to sort of augment, your staff members. If you've got less experienced members of your team, guidance and help and support, and making them more efficient. And from for users that have maybe got a little bit more experience, just an aid in order to take some of the heavy lifting and burden off some monotonous tasks, possibly.
Yeah, and some of the primary use cases Microsoft sort of suggest that it's good for sort of making use of is things like I said, investigation remediation, building KQL queries, or like I said, the analyzing the scripts. So if you don't know how to get some data, because Defender XDR, Sentinel, there's tons of data in there. How do you work out, if you're not doing KQL all the time, how do I get my base, KQL into, for what I'm, the data I'm asking for? So that's quite, powerful to enhance, get people to, get to the data. It's also use case for understanding risks and managing security posture. So asking it what the top 5, risks are. Defining and managing security policy. So that's more around, Intune probably, being able to understand what policy you should have in there. And you can also ask it again around the threats and things like that, because it's got access to Microsoft Threat Intelligence. You can say, what's the, this week's top 5 security risks, or threat intelligence data for this week, kind of thing, and it will give you an output of that. And then finally, allowing Security Copilot to help you build or develop reports for stakeholders. So being able to set the right tone in the report or in the summarization of something, so that it's easily understandable by maybe C-suite or other members of the organization, because that might be a skill that it's possible that a skill that a security analyst might not have, because all their focus is all about protecting the organization, investigating things like that. And maybe there may be probably the same thing with like myself, being able to write good reports might be more difficult and waste more of my their time, rather than getting someone to help build it out.
Yeah, okay, that makes total sense. And any tool that can help sift through the large amount of data that these analysts need to deal with on a daily basis, it can only be a good thing. Right? I suppose what are you seeing in terms of accuracy? Just out of curiosity, because I know that a lot of people have concerns over sort of generative AI and hallucinations and validity of data. With your testing, how accurate do you feel it sort of gets and hits?
So it generally isn't. It's fair to say it generally isn't too bad, because you've got that pre-processing kind of part of it, so it's always getting near real-time data. to help with sort of the response, things like that. I think some of the comments have been that from a couple of our customers that have been sort of interacting with it, has kind of been around that asking the questions sometimes maybe a little bit more difficult. It's that prompt engineering. Prompt engineering being the term of how to construct the prompts for generative AI, isn't it, Sam? In effect, it's almost like when you search on Google, Bing, you've got a certain way of doing it. You put all the keywords in a certain order and you get your result. We've all been trained to that now. And now with generative AI, you've got to think a different way of it. Adding context, purpose, output, things like that. So, but yeah, the feedback's kind of been that Security Copilot isn't, or the large language model doesn't seem to be as good as the Microsoft 365 Copilot one, as an example. Definitely seen that sort of scenario where it's a bit more harder to get the prompt right. But yeah, I've seen a lot of summarization, and I think a lot of customers also want the full detail out of it. They've asked for a report of all their assets, maybe, or something like that, and they get the summary of it, and not necessarily all the raw data. I've seen that as well, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, and is it really a tool for pulling raw data? Is that more for the tools themselves? Should you really be asking it to sort of pull data from APIs and reproduce it?
It's a good question, but it's more around it's got access to all the data, and you're trying to ask it to go and find it all, if that makes sense. It's kind of being used to search, I suppose. But then it is, even when you're generating information, you're asking it, aren't you, to go and find something for you. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's difficult.
Okay.
Because trying to find one of the examples might be trying to work out how many defender. So the example that I've had in the past with an organization is that they've asked it for which defender for endpoints are unhealthy, and give me the list, and it will come back saying there's 30 of them, and here's the first 5. Right. And it's like, cool, but I want the list. Like, you told me it's 30 that's wrong, but I need that information, the rest of the information, to be able to then do the next step to remediate, kind of thing, or tackle. So, and yes, you might be able to find that in the KQL, the APIs, kind of thing, but this has got the access to the data to give you it quickly.
Yeah.
So that's a scenario. Yeah, going to grab all assets and that's probably a bigger task, and that's probably a fair thing. It's not something you do, but yeah, when you're asking it a specific thing, it gives you tells you there's 30 and it only gives you 5 or 10. They're kind of like, cool. Where's the other 20?
Yeah, and is that way then the more discrete prompt engineering needs to come in, where you have to specifically say, please output all of them, whereas
put them into a table.
Yeah,
things like that. It might be, and that's the that's the difficult part of all generative AI, really, is getting the prompt right from it. And that's again when the prompt books come in place, because once you've got the masterpiece, I'm going to call it, of the prompt that you need to get the data you need, you then want to put in a prompt book so you can reuse it. So you don't have to try and work it out every time, or save it in a notepad or your wiki kind of thing. It's just in the it's a prompt book as your first prompt, and then you got your second prompt, to then get the next piece of data.
Yeah.
So
okay, no, that's great. Lots to unpack there. And because I think just because of the amount of things that it can connect to, right, and what it's trying to do, right, more the sources of data more than anything else, right. That's the big part of it.
I think Microsoft have put in a lot of development into the embedded experience. When you're in the portals, you're having Copilot there, and I think that does seem to be in some way the best experience, I think, of it. In that, when you go to conditional access or risky sign-in users, things like that, and you go and look at where users signed in from, why has it been deemed risky, all that sort of stuff. There is quite a few tabs there, and you have to kind of piece everything together on all the tabs in your mind. But with the because Security Copilot's there, it's able to summarize the actions that users taken into one one summary basically, and that saves tremendous amount of time just in that part really. It is also in Purview. I don't know if I said that actually. It's now moved into Purview for insider risk management, so it can help you understand the alerts that are in there. So that's also quite powerful in itself.
Okay, nice. So how? So can we specifically talk about some of the the benefits for SOC operation teams? Because that feels like the probably the biggest area. Is this is this an efficiency boost to help them respond to more threats?
Yeah. So like I was so a lot of the scenarios I've sort of talked about, maybe not the comparing policies on devices, but all the other ones are kind of ones to assist in faster response to triaging or response to incidents. I think it's responding to incidents at machine speed. I think there's a better. I think it's said slightly differently, but in effect, Copilot's doing that summary for you, which means you don't have to, or even if you run through the incident and resolve it, being able to create the incident report for you, so you can put it into the ITSM or into Defender XDR, Sentinel, whichever tooling that's being used at the time. Being able to put that in place in a way that a customer, the head of security, the CISO can understand, is will hopefully strip large amounts of time off for that security analyst to then get onto the next issue, or to then do proactive hunting whilst they're waiting for the next incident to come in, sort of thing. So yeah, it's definitely those kind of things. Being able to do the ask it specific questions, so it can jump onto the other data. What IP address? Is this IP address been deemed risky in threat intelligence? Kind of thing. It to go off and go and do that search. Either over the internet, over the connectors, to then give you the yes or no, or it's all good. I think, like I said, I think that one, the example Microsoft's got for the automatic sort of triaging logic app is very powerful, because it goes off to all the various things, gets X amount of sign-in logs, checks where they've been, checks the IPs of the the entities, check URLs, things like that, and then just gives it to you in a summary by the time you get to it. All those like 5, 10, 15 checks have been done. You've just got the raw data to make a decision on. I think that's crazily powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Being able to bring all that data together, is sort of the number one challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's not just because theory you could have a logic app to get you all that raw data and then just post it in the the instant as a comment, so you can see all the raw data. Well, that's great, but then you've got to then analyze it, piece it all together, that kind of thing. And Security Copilot's then just doing that for you, that next sort of layer. Tell me why this is important or isn't important, etc. Depending on what prompt you do, to put it into that into that into the incident. So then you've got it you've got context to it, or what Copilot sort of recommends around it as well. Oh yes, this is it's been seen 4 weeks ago as being malicious, but not now. So actually, it's probably low risk, etc. Sort of thing. So yeah.
Okay, nice. And can we sort of go over the agents that you spoke of, with these sort of latest updates from Microsoft?
Yeah. So again, I've not had a chance to play with these because they are two. I think they came out at the 1st of May or 30th of April kind of thing. But yeah, we've got agents now. So agents have been coming into the the Copilot world, and in sort of generalizing that because we've got agents now in Microsoft 365 Copilot, for SharePoint and a few others there. The I think there's a translation one, isn't there, and a meeting one, and the project manager one. But in Security Copilot, basically they've created their own ones now, and there are partners that have also created some. But in effect, it's to automate repetitive tasks and in effect reduce that manual workload. So the ones that basically they've brought in so far is conditional access optimization, phishing triage agent, and threat intelligence briefing agent. So the conditional access one will run and it will tell you where there's gaps within your conditional access and where you should kind of remediate. And sometimes there are some like one-click buttons to create the policies that you need. Conditional access is quite, depending on which way you sort of configure it, can be really simple or super complex because it needs to be. And when it's super complex, sometimes there are gaps that are unknown. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Sam? That it can be it cannot say overcomplicated, but you may need complex because you need that granularity. But that can cause unintended gaps in its coverage.
Yeah, the power in in conditional access is its flexibility, right? But with that,
Yeah.
with that, responsibility, you can sometimes have to make decisions because of your environment that makes it more challenging to track, whether you do have good coverage or not. So, and that's why just applying like a specific set of like rigid logic to everybody's conditional access doesn't make sense. So it does kind of make sense that you would want like some sort of language model or artificial intelligence to try and see through some of that nuance to identify gaps.
Yeah. So yeah, we've got that one. The phishing triaging. So that is basically users that have submitted phishing incidents. So saying you're reporting phishing, it basically goes in and does the triage of it to understand whether it is a false positive or true positive, basically, to give you that response to basically say no, it's false, don't worry about it. So you don't have to do that investigation of it. And that runs pretty much instantly as soon as one of those is reported. And in a large organization, that could be hundreds, thousands a day of reporting potentially. And you just got something just going off and just basically coming back to you with no, false positive, they just didn't like the email. Or yep, this is one that you need to go and zap everywhere and add to block lists, etc. And then finally the ones that are available, you've got the threat intelligence briefing. So yeah, again, being able to create the reports based on threat data and building they must have like a template in effect of what that should look like. Other agents that are available that Microsoft first party ones are a DLP triaging, insider risk management, alert triaging, and I think that is it. There is a Defender XDR agent to triage information as well. I think that's no, ignore that. That's the one I was talking about. No, it's the Intune vulnerability remediation. So being able to tell you which ones you should be remediating first. So that's based on the Defender for endpoint data, but an Intune admin doesn't necessarily have to have access to Intune to get to Defender to see that data. This agent will go off and collect that data and tell basically the Intune admin to what they need to remediate and how to do it, kind of thing. So I think that's quite powerful. But yeah, and then you've got partner ones. So you've got like network supervisor agent, root cause analysis of VPN gateways and connection outages, SecOps tooling agent, assessing your security, your SOC and the state of control, and making recommendations to optimize it. Task optimizer, so forecasting and prioritizing most critical threat alerts to reduce alert fatigue. And privacy breach, so analyzing data breaches to generate guidance for the privacy team on how to meet regulatory requirements. So I think that one's quite powerful in understanding who you need to contact, things like that, because security analysts may not be educated in that space when they're dealing with all the other technology and other training that they've taken. It's another mindset, I think it's fair to say, around understanding what regulatory compliance is, or regulatory requirements you need to sort of hit with that.
Nice. Yeah, so it seems like there's a lot of development in this area and a lot of specific use cases that are being developed, right? So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what further enhancements they create.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting time around it.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. Right, I suppose the big question I've got next, Alan, is how is it licensed and what does it cost?
So yeah, so this is probably the partial sticking point in all conversations around Security Copilot. So let's talk about the pricing mechanism for it. So previously, until very recently, you had to buy security compute units. So these are I don't even know how to explain these, but in effect, whenever you're creating prompts or asking Security Copilot, you are consuming a security a security compute unit (SCU) to generate that to basically ask the LLM and do the the summarization. Previously, you had to not to say pre-commit, but you had to assign how many SCUs you wanted to use, and then once you consumed those SCUs within an hour, if you did consume it all, then you were then unable to prompt the Security Copilot. Then wouldn't be able to be executed because you wouldn't have enough SCUs left or enough in effect tokens against it. What Microsoft's done now is they've done a sort of two-tiering with this. So you can provision X amount of SCUs, and that is they are running all the time. They're active, available, and you get charged per hour for them. And in effect, that's your minimum provisioned SCU count. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, etc. But what they've allowed you to do now is say you can do in effect bursting above that, so overage basically on SCUs. So that allows you to then say, well, I always want one SCU all the time, but I know that when I've got an incident, I'm going to burst up to 4 or 5 SCUs for maybe an hour, 2 hours at a time. Now, instead of creating some automation in Azure to sort of increase it and decrease it, you can now say, well, actually, I'm only going to pay for one all the time, but when I burst, I'll just pay for that hour for what I've used, basically. But I can't burst past, 8 total kind of thing. So that's quite good. So you're not having to commit to minimum amount kind of thing to save costs. So for a provisioned SCU, it is $4 per hour. So one SCU for 1 month is $2,920. Microsoft has recommended that you, for sort of normal day-to-day usage, that you should have probably a minimum of 3 SCUs, which then makes it $8,760 a month for a provisioned SCUs. So that was the recommended sort of tiering with that. Now, what you could say is that actually you're not going to use it as much straight away. I want 1 SCU, but I want to be able to burst up to 3, maybe 4. So the overage the overage SCU price is $6. So it's $2 more than provisioned. But then you're only using it, and that's per hour again. You're only using it, maybe an hour here, an hour there, etc. So you probably still save, even though it's more expensive, if that makes sense. Not unless you're constantly, on the, going above the pre-provisioned SCUs. So if we were to say 1 SCU and 2 SCUs over, let's just work this out quickly. Of course it is. We said that you had it for a whole month, and then for half the month you were, in the overage. Then it would cost you $7,300 per month. So that is cheaper than running 3 SCUs all the time, if that makes sense. So you're still making a saving there per se. So
yeah, because
it is.
I suppose
Go on.
if you don't have an international team, these SCUs are going to be idle for at least the overnight, aren't they?
Yeah, if you're not 24/7,
Yeah.
you need to have at least 1 SCU active to keep, agents running, or other, just to keep the data and it all sort of, active basically. So yeah, your minimum is always going to be 1 SCU really. It's just then whether you burst or not.
Okay.
Now, I believe you can still do automation with, logic apps or API calls to increase your provisioned. Maybe overnight you're at 1, and then you can burst up to 8 in case you have an incident. Maybe because you have to be called in to, do something because there is something major. But maybe in the daytime you set yourself at 2 SCUs minimum because you're running all the embedded stuff. Your sec admin teams are using it as well. And then maybe you increase it to there, so you save. If you're always going to be, in the the overage, then you need to work out how you transition the provisional, if that makes sense, the provision stuff to save you, $2 an hour, which is quite a lot to save over, the year, the month kind of thing. So
yeah, I suppose just over time you're going to work that out based on your reporting, right? You're going to understand after a few months worth of usage whether you should be, using a logic app to scale up to 3 during the day, and then go back to 1 overnight with a burst of up to, your example, 8 is the most optimal way for you to manage that.
Yeah, and you still might have bursting in the daytime because, again, if you have an incident, you might still need to go up to 8, 10. It might be, but you're just setting the minimum because that's what you're using, in effect. So, yeah, that's how it's done. It does seem, a lot of the comments from customers is that it seems quite expensive. It's not really any entry to it per se. There's quite, apart from, well, you need one SCU as a minimum kind of thing. But I think you just got to work out the processes, those use cases, the agents now, doing those mundane tasks, things like that. How much time does that save? It's a really tricky one because it's not very easy, I suppose, to understand the savings, if that makes sense, because it's all about time saving. So you've got to work out, okay, we've had, 50, users report, phishing. Each one takes 15, 20 minutes to investigate. That's X amount of hours. At the rate, the cost rate of that individual, an analyst is this. Does that warrant, paying for Copilot to do it for me? Probably, or part of it. So now then, what's to the next stage? What else does it help with? So
Yeah, I think it's all also around what your process is in, ultimately your maturity is in this space
yeah,
today, and what you have the resources for, right? Because if you're a really small organization and you track what you can track, and you accept the risks of not tracking certain things, right? It's going to be hard for you to justify, what is it, like nearly $3,000 a month spend on 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 optimizing a use case that you might not track today, or it might enable you to actually start, monitoring something that you don't currently monitor today. So you could look at it from that perspective. Instead of adding another headcount, you could augment your really small team with, yes, a very expensive product, relative to other things in your organization. But for large teams, where people's literal jobs is actually doing a lot of this, day to day, and those SCUs are shared between people, right? It's like a pool of
yeah,
resource, effectively. Um, um, then if you have a large group of analysts that are working, that anything that you can do to improve their efficacy, it is going to be measurable in some way, right? Because if you've got an on-call, let's say you've got a 24/7 staff of, I don't know, 2 or 3 people always available. That's probably a team of, I don't know, 12, maybe 15 potentially. I don't know. Like however you've got your ratio set up. If you can, use these SCUs, to help speed those teams up and make them more accurate, there is going to be a financial saving there. I think each organization is going to have to work out that ROI for themselves, right? Because I think this
yeah,
calculation is even more complex than like the 365 Copilot,
yeah,
one. And I think the struggle for me really is you have things like GitHub Copilot, which is effectively like an AI assistant. Okay, it's not pulling from as much data. It's effectively looking at your code files and your project, and understanding what you're trying to code, and help you autocomplete. Now that costs 10, 15, $20 a month, right? Maybe in the enterprise settings a bit more expensive. Um, but I think this does need to be priced higher, because just the vast amount of data that it's connecting to and the processing that's having to do feels a lot heavier to me than reading a file of a C# code and saying, hey, I think the next line, or the function that you should create is this, right? So you know
and
there is a scale element of it there, which does factor into the price as well, because
yeah, and
it's not
as
free.
far as I'm aware as well, and I think it's still the case, is that you do get access to Microsoft Threat Intelligence, which is a cost in itself as well, because it's in effect based. It needs that data to be able to give you, the latest threats and things like that. So you are getting sort of two products potentially with one SCU, I think, still.
Yeah, yeah, and that, I believe it's something like 40,000
A
euros,
year or
dollars,
something like that.
pounds, or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. It's quite expensive, isn't it?
The
So
Microsoft Threat Intelligence, yeah.
yeah, I thought there was like a calculation somewhere that just one SCU was cheaper than the threat intelligence price or something like
Almost
that.
the equivalent of, or something
Yeah,
like
it's
that,
very
yeah.
similar. So if you're on that product, you effectively like, but might as well grab an SCU, right? You know,
Yeah, because it can
instead.
summarize it for you then, can't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so there's multiple things going on there. Will the price put off smaller customers? I think so. Everybody's highly focused on their budgets, their P&Ls, X, Y, and Z. But if there is enough demonstrable value, it will sell, won't it? And it will be used.
Yeah.
And like agents have been added to Security Copilot, and there's not been an uplift in the cost of the SCUs, has there? I know they've got this now, like
the bursting stuff. Yeah,
burstable one, but that's different. But that's because you've got that flexibility. You're paying a higher rate for it, right?
yeah,
Agents is now included in the price. I'm not going to say it was added for free because it's definitely not free, but it's additional value added in
yeah. I
as well.
mean, we don't know about the agents, about what cost there might be or how they run, because in the preview they're going to be free until they go GA in effect. So there may be additional costs there, or there may be.
Okay,
I don't know
right.
what the mechanism. All I know is you got to have Security Copilot to run them as a back end sort of thing.
Okay. So yeah, I'll take that back. That specific example, might not turn out to be the case.
But yeah, there's a lot in there. I mean, we're bursting at the seams of an episode here. We're already at 5 minutes past an hour from our side.
Right. Well, let's wrap this up. But But thank you for that overview, Alan. I think exciting new product. It's good to see
Yeah,
something like fresh. I would say it is only like a year old, right? So it feels like it's still got legs to improve and expand.
yeah. I think that's fair. It is. It's definitely being developed on, and it's definitely improving. So it's just almost like a watch this space, see if you can use it, get value out of it, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Thanks ever so much for that, Alan.
It's all right. What's the next episode then, quickly, as we don't want to keep our listeners here too much longer.
Okay, so I'm going to cover the next episode, and I'm going to talk about a tool called Scuba Gear. And it's an assessment tool that helps you to verify your Microsoft 365 tenant configuration. And what it does is it checks your configuration against what's called the Secure Cloud Business Applications configuration baseline. So this is a set of opinionated configuration settings for 365. And it's a tool that you can run yourself. It's free to use, and it can give you some really good output and visibility. So I wanted to I wanted to do sort of a deep dive of how it works, what you get out of it, and what some of the benefits are.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I've heard you talk about it, so I'm going to be interested in that one. Cool. So, did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. This really helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you have any specific feedback or suggestions on episodes, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thanks ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, thanks all.